Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Chris Hong and I am an artist and I make art videos. I recently came back from a month-and-a-half long trip to Japan and Korea. And from that trip, I brought home my latest muse, this long-legged tanned Hello Kitty bag charm slash purse pal, trinket, what have you. She is stunning, she is perfect, and she is behind the inspiration for today's illustration. So because this Hello Kitty, we'll call her Long Kitty in this video, because Long Kitty has long legs, kind of feels like she has more human-like proportions, so I thought it would be really cute to draw her with a human friend. And I really wanted to accentuate the long legs because that's kind of the whole shtick. So I drew them in motion, walking with their arms linked, and that's kind of how this idea came together. Basically, it's Long Kitty and her bestie being baddies walking around at night in Tokyo. And I thought this was a really cute idea, so I decided to run with it instead of doing a ton of exploration. It's my first illustration since coming back from a trip, so I just wanted to work on something fun and not put too much pressure on myself. Yeah, I just wanted to keep it kind of light and keep it fun and draw a silly little illustration. So I've never done a background like this where it is a more urban environment with a lot of buildings and perspective and straight lines, and it is not something that I feel very confident in. So I used a photo that I took on my trip, a photo from Shibuya specifically, as pretty much direct reference for this scene. It's not the famous Shibuya crossing intersection, but it's a very popular shopping area surrounded by department stores, and you can see Shibuya Parko in the far back and even the Disney store. So I thought those little details could be fun Easter eggs for those that have been to Tokyo and can maybe recognize this intersection and feel nostalgic about their trip. So starting off the painting, I honestly didn't really know where to begin, but I figured I will start out by tinting the lights first, tinting the color of the lights, so like the street lights and the street lamp, and I imagined there being a pink colored rim light on the left side of the characters, because I wanted a yellowish green light coming from the right hand side where the characters are walking towards, because there is that colored light source in that direction, and then the overall kind of color for the environment I imagined to be this like teal turquoise color. For full transparency, I heavily referenced the Sailor Moon anime backgrounds. I basically trying to kind of replicate those backgrounds in my illustration because I've never attempted a background like this and I needed something to go off of, and I honestly wanted to just do a very obvious nod and wink to Sailor Moon, and I didn't think that I could really improve upon it, at least in tackling this type of background on my first try. So really just try to emulate that look. And how I dissected it was that the buildings are kind of turquoisey from the top, but then as we descend down to the bottom, you see it becomes more illuminated with the street lights and the lights coming from within the buildings and the windows reflecting the light. And so basically the first layer of this painting is me tinting these like colored lights and just trying to make sense of the pattern of the colors. So I treated all the kind of like top part of the objects with a cooler color, the teal turquoise color, and then as we descend further down, it becomes lighter and lighter to yellow or like a light pink. I hope this is making sense. I'm really sorry if this is really confusing. But basically why I'm working like this is because I want to preserve the luminosity of the paper and the purity of the color for as long as possible, because those very bright pastel colors are really difficult to achieve, and it's really easy to make them dirty throughout the progression of a watercolor painting as you apply more and more paint. I wanted to establish them right off the bat because the plan was to work from light to dark and paint around these areas to create those bright spots in the painting to mimic the city lights, the like reflections off the buildings and street lights, and just the general kind of diffused ambiguous light source coming from the streets. I don't know what medium the Sailor Moon backgrounds were done in. I actually don't know if it was digital or analog, but if it is analog, then it's definitely a more like opaque medium like gouache or acrylics. So I'm sure the like order of operations is different. But yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear if you would have approached setting up this painting differently. Then I start laying down some of the local colors. For Long Kitty, I basically kept the colors very faithful to the colors of the plush. Not really sure what more to say on local colors, but I was trying to be careful to not paint over the rim light, so I was painting around the rim light. And the colors for her friend character, well, the friend character is actually just loosely based off of me, and the clothes are also very loosely based off the clothes that I got, the pieces that I picked up while I was in Japan. So yeah, just trying to add some like personal touches throughout the illustration. And after I had the gist of the characters down, I moved on to the background. And for the asphalt, I was careful not to go too dark because I didn't want there to be too high of a contrast between the like white lines, especially towards the back, because I wanted to create that like illusion of depth within the scene. I was really nervous about painting the background, but I told myself I just need to stick to the like pattern of colors that I set and the lighting scenario that I had established. So I just kind of stuck to that and just started with the most obvious things. So I wanted the walk signal light and the street lamp. Those lights are light sources and they have to feel light. So obviously I have to darken the area around them so they feel lighter in contrast. So I was just like working on areas that felt most obvious. And that is what I try to do in cases where I don't necessarily know what I'm doing and I don't feel super confident. And in the Sailor Moon backgrounds, I noticed that the sky is usually lighter than the tops of the buildings. But I think in my painting, I just felt like I had to go darker in the background to make it feel more like nighttime. I don't know if that's like right or wrong. I mean, this is all very stylized. But yeah, it made more sense, I feel, in my illustration to have the sky darker than the buildings. Now I'm going in with the second pass for the characters, which is where I deepen the colors and I try to get the local colors to look a little bit more accurate, and I render out the details, like the features. In hindsight, looking back on the piece as I am editing, I feel like I could have kept the local color pass as is and just focused on rendering the features, and then I don't think I would have felt the need to go over all of the areas again with a second pass, because I think I ended up going a little bit too dark. But yeah, it kind of ended up needing a lot of readjusting later. So I wish I had just focused on rendering the features and then assessed from there, because maybe that is all that was really needed. So here is the little story time portion of this video. There's another kind of inspiration behind this illustration, a secret origin story, if you will. I was in Osaka for about 4 or 5 days, and for this portion of my Japan trip, I was flying solo. And I was staying in this area called Namba, and it's a very busy area. It's got like one of the main train stations, and it's got a lot of shopping. The famous Dotonbori area is nearby, so picture a very like busy, bustling place even at night. And one night around like I would say 10 p.m. after I had a long day of just like running about, I was coming home and I was like a block away from my hotel, and I came to a crosswalk and I was waiting for that light to turn when I noticed from my peripheral vision a man kind of like hovering and as the light turns he starts talking to me. I didn't understand because I don't speak Japanese, but I did pick out the word kirei, which means pretty. So I was like, you know, thank you for the compliment, but this is sus. What else are you saying? What are you gonna follow up with that? Now, mind you, this man, he was your typical Japanese salaryman, you know, with the suit and the briefcase. And from my estimation, I would say he was in his late 40s, if not early 50s. So obviously I had my guard up, and he's like frantically trying to communicate something to me. So he starts talking to me in English, you know, to the best of his abilities, and he asks me where I'm from, and then he asks me, how old are you? And I was like, the audacity of this man, this clearly much older man, to ask me how old I am. Like, I think I just like gave him some sassy response in English that he clearly just did not understand. He kept asking me like, how old are you? How old are you? By this time, we probably just came to the end of the crosswalk, and I was like literally steps away from my hotel. I did not want him to know that I was staying at this hotel. So I just stopped walking and unfortunately had to stand there with him. And then eventually he was like, one drink. He just kept repeating, one drink. And I was just like baffled and, you know, kind of had that like out of body experience. Like, is this really happening to me right now? At this point in time, there were still a lot of people around. So thankfully I didn't feel like I was in danger. But I really just didn't know how to, in that moment, quickly get rid of him because I didn't want to make a scene. And at this point in Japan, this is like my second time in Japan, and I have been trying my best to be like a polite, courteous tourist. So unfortunately, I was in that kind of mindset of, you know, maybe I should be a little bit polite and not outright just like yell at him to go away. I was saying no like in English, but he was very persistent. So he just kept repeating, one drink. So ultimately what I ended up doing was this like very exaggerated crossing my arms X sign that honestly I have gotten from the Japanese. It's their gesture for signaling no. And I was like, iie, which is a word for no in Japanese. And I just kept doing that until he gave up. Finally, he just kind of like muttered something in Japanese and walked away, but like very sheepishly. He didn't just like outright leave. He just kind of lingered about. And I, again, because I was so close to my hotel, basically I did not want to turn my back to him, and I wanted to make sure that he left because I didn't want him to see me going into my hotel. So that's what I did. I just kind of stood around too and like watched him take his sweet ass time leaving. So how does this relate to my illustration? Well, I basically wanted to capture this kind of like, how dare you have the audacity to approach me kind of attitude in the characters. You know, I wanted them to just look like, we don't have time for you. Don't talk to us, leave us alone. That's the attitude that I wanted to convey. So yeah, when people ask me how I find inspiration for my pictures, it really often just comes from life and from kind of funny little stories like this. So at this point in the painting, I switched to using color pencils. I use them mostly in the characters for a little bit of color correction. I found that Kitty's skin tone was feeling a little bit too green and yellow, so I toned it to be a little bit more pink. I use the color pencils to smooth out some of the blotchy, darker patches that were created in the second watercolor pass. And I allow myself to be fairly liberal with the color pencils with the characters, because I actually kind of like how the soft texture helps separate the characters from the background. Especially on Kitty, it kind of mimicked that soft plush texture. Again, with the background, I was heavily referencing the Sailor Moon anime backgrounds, and in those backgrounds there are these kinds of colored circles meant to indicate lights at night. You know what I'm talking about. At night, lights are kind of described as these colored circles. And so I definitely wanted to include that as well, and I started by drawing them out in color pencils. But I quickly realized that the color pencil just did not have enough strength to be opaque enough, to be as light enough in value, or as saturated enough in color. So yeah, I quickly realized that I will have to bring in another like opaque medium over top. And then I remembered that I had purchased Posca paint markers while I was in Japan, and I had never used them before, except I do have one Posca paint marker. It's like the fine tip kind, and it's in white, and I primarily use it to correct ink drawings, but I think I got a defected one because it doesn't work very well. But I had faith that what I had was just a lemon, and that Posca paint markers are as amazing as people say they are. So I did take the gamble, and I just purchased a whole bunch on my trip, and I figured this was like the perfect opportunity to test them out, and it looked to be working pretty well. It was definitely lighter and more saturated in color than I was able to achieve with the color pencils. So after testing out a couple of the colors, I brought them into the painting and went over the areas that I had blocked out in colored pencils, and yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It worked very well, and it was actually pretty quick to fill them out. And I often use acrylic paint over my watercolor illustrations, and while I have the option to do that, I think going with the Posca marker route is definitely much faster. I will say the Posca marker does leave a bit of a gritty kind of texture, and I think on another illustration I might be more bothered by that, but because this was kind of like a fun kind of getting back into painting kind of a piece for me, I just felt more relaxed about it. I didn't go over all of the light orbs with the Posca paint marker because I didn't want it to look too opaque and kind of like stamped on. So I just kind of selectively went over some of them, and I also tried to kind of create this gradient look so that it wasn't just like a solid circle. And the last thing that I do in this piece is I wanted to emphasize the sense of motion of the characters crossing the street. So I added some speed line kind of effects with the Posca paint marker. along the left-hand side of the characters, just kind of like trailing little blobs to indicate them walking towards the right side. And I think because it's such a bright color with the white Posca paint marker, it kind of gives it like a sparkle effect for a little bit more drama. So I was happy with that decision. So in the end, is this my most favorite piece ever? No. Will I try to monetize this piece outside of making this YouTube video? Probably not. I mean, I can see it being a cute postcard maybe, but mostly I just wanted to create a piece just for the sake of creating a piece, and then at the time when I got the idea, I thought it was a fun idea. Now, the execution I think could have been better. I'm not 100% satisfied with the overall lighting, and I think the background could definitely be stronger, but I want to normalize for myself just making mid pictures, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything beyond that. I'm trying to be okay with feeling like this picture is just okay. I want to thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Let me know what you thought of the process and the little story time portion, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!